the forgotten Harley-Davidson. Today we're going to be looking at a 2008 Springer Softail CVO, and I'm going to tell you everything I know about this motorcycle, including the pros and cons as I see it, which is kind of interesting considering how this bike looks. You would think there would be more cons, but anyways, we'll cover all of that. And of course, I'm going to tell you something I find interesting about this bike. We're going to explore a little bit about where it came from, but if Harley were to make a bike like this today, do you think it would sell? Now I'm going to give you my opinion on that. I want to hear yours, whatever it might be. Leave that down below. Let's go ahead and jump right in. So Harley used the Springer front end all the way from like the earliest of 1907 through the 30s, into the 40s, into World War II, of course, throughout the 40s, and even after the 40s, up until like 1949. That's when the Hydroglide actually brought what most of us consider to be a pretty standard front end with their hydraulic telescopic forks. So you go from this bike that looks like it was essentially bred out of a machine shop, right? I mean, just almost looks like just somebody just kind of put this thing together and just added a couple of springs for rebounding compression and the fork legs. It's a very, very unique and industrial kind of rugged look to it, to telescopic forks, which is much cleaner, much more predictable. But then in 1988, Willie G. Davison is like, hey, let's bring this bike back. I mean, he's kind of what the motor company's missing, to be totally honest with you. Somebody that's kind of more forward-thinking, understands the community, I think is probably the biggest thing. Regardless, in 1988, they came out with the, once again, Springer Softail. They added a couple different models, and then in 08, I think it was actually 07 to 09, could be 08 to 09, depending on production dates and all that, but they came out with the Springer Softail CVO. That's the bike that you're looking at right now. And back then, it was $25,000. Now I use chat to kind of see, what is that adjusted for inflation today? It's like $37,000. Back in 2008, and you guys all know what happened in 2008, of course, the market crashed. Now I just did a video talking about Buell and how in 08 or actually 09, they removed the Buell lineup, right? They sold that off. But they were still technically making bikes like this, which are insanely priced. I mean, even today, that's just like an insane cost for this type of motorcycle. So these were some of the decisions I think they were making at the time. Now, remember, these bikes, there was like 2,500 made, so it's not a big production thing. So they knew it wasn't going to be like the latest and greatest, the next best thing for Harley-Davidson, but at the same time, it's an expensive endeavor. Now, I think the last motorcycle that they actually brought out with a Springer front end was the Crossbones, and they discontinued that in 2011. So that brings us to this bike. What actually is this motorcycle? Well, it's a 750-pound Softail. It's got a 5-gallon tank. It's got the 110 with the Screaming Eagle, high flow intake, very low seat height, like 26 inches, very little ground clearance. Kind of a muscle bike appearance, old school muscle bike appearance, if you will. These things were pushing like, 110 foot-pounds of torque. They were, of course, under 100 horsepower, so they never listed the horsepower numbers back then, but super torquey engine. These were counterbalanced. So one thing you'll notice with this twin cam specifically is you don't get a lot of that shake. It's much more smooth, much closer to what you'll find with the M8s of today. You have that nice clean rear fender. I kind of call it Harley's muscle bike fender, right? In a way, it has a little bit of a sweep up towards the end. Looks very clean, right? This one specifically had some custom mods done, right? So the starter button, the turn signals, all the gauges or switches essentially were changed up. You have a standard Softail center console, and overall just a bike that's going to get a heck of a lot of attention. This did have one of the custom paint jobs. I want to say there was actually 2 custom paint jobs that year, but I've also seen references to a third as well. You guys maybe that own one of these bikes back then, let me know. But this one kind of has that ghosted flame. It looks incredible. I mean, it really is kind of a show-stopping motorcycle. And whoever rode this bike, by the way, put 70,000 miles on it. I mean, they didn't just like look at it. They rode this thing. But that's one of the more interesting parts, is riding it, because I'm like, dude, this thing is going to suck on the road. Now, the very first thing I noticed was either it has a relocation kit for the pegs up front, or they just made these bikes for the taller people in the Harley-Davidson community. Now, I would think Harley-Davidson wouldn't put the pegs that far forward, so it makes me think there's some kind of relocation kit here. This was just a taller rider, and with the bars, you're basically kind of reaching out like this. I wouldn't call it as bad as maybe like the V-Rod, right? That bike really had me stretched out, right? I kind of referenced the letter C because that's the way I felt on that motorcycle. This is pretty freaking close though. So that's the first thing I noticed, right? Super, super tall. Basically felt like I was kind of stretched all the way out. And then of course, whenever I was shifting up through the gears, you know, I was using the very tip of my boot to get that thing up. But regardless, you know, you kind of get used to it, right? I just kind of sat up on the tank just a little bit more to accommodate myself to this motorcycle. Besides that, it kind of reminded me of, and some of you may agree, some of you may disagree, but it kind of reminded me of the Breakout. It's like really good in a straight line. And I felt like it actually did corner maybe a little bit better than what the Breakout doesn't have a ton of ground clearance either, but it reminded me a little bit of that motorcycle, of course. And then surprisingly, it wasn't as harsh as I thought it was going to be over some of those bumps. Now, it wasn't great. It's not something that I would want to ride cross country. Let's just be totally honest here. Whoever rode this motorcycle may beg to differ though, because he put a ton of miles on it. But it wasn't as harsh as I was thinking. It held the road pretty well. I did not take it on the interstate. I thought, I don't really see the point with this motorcycle because it's not something I'm going to ride. Maybe some of you guys that have ridden one of these can tell me if you've done really long road trips on a bike like this. I don't see it as like a mountain carver either. But again, some of you may disagree. Some of you may say, hey, there's no Harleys that are good for mountain carving. So, you know, I mean, to each their own there. But it was surprisingly more comfortable, and the dampening wasn't as good as what you'll find on inverted front forks, especially. It wasn't as soft and plush as what you will find with a modern suspension. That's just a given, but it definitely wasn't as harsh as what I was thinking it was going to be either. Now, another thing that you'll find with this, which is kind of interesting, is that you're not going to get as much brake dive with a bike like this. Now, once you get used to a motorcycle, you kind of know how much brake dive you're going to get. When you use the rear brake, especially, and you're coming to a stop, you really don't even worry about a brake dive at that point. But it's very predictable on newer motorcycles. On this one, you don't really get a lot of that at all, if any, really. Overall, the bike ran really good, you know, kind of fun to ride, especially when you're just kind of cruising. Now, I will tell you that the heat advancements, or the advancements that Harley has made in their heat distribution, especially from that rear rocker box, is definitely an improvement. That rear rocker was cooking the inside of my thigh. It is what it is. This wasn't a particularly hot day either, so just, you know, keep that in mind. But kind of to be expected, I think, there with some of these older Harley-Davidsons. Overall, a cool bike. And, you know, American Biker had this one up for 10 grand, you know, which that's a heck of a discount considering what these things went for originally. But, you know, if Harley made a bike like that today, would it sell? Well, I would say right now, at this point in history, Harley-Davidson shouldn't, or probably won't, ever even consider making this motorcycle right now. I think that would be a really dumb financial decision. Unless they were able to come out with this bike and it's under like 15 grand, I would say pushing a bike like that right now, not great. They could, I guess, do it in the future, you know, assuming things get better for the motor company and they have some, you know, opportunities to kind of play around with some different designs or bring some old designs back and kind of soup them up. I mean, imagine a bike like this with now a 121 or even, you know, some of the more upgraded engines. That would be pretty insane. Of course, this bike didn't have ABS at the time. I believe the touring bikes did, and then, of course, the Softail lineups later came with ABS. But you add some of those more modern features to a bike like this, it could be cool. But it couldn't be $37,000 cool, no matter what they put on the motorcycle. Overall, bad move if they were to do it right now, maybe in the future, but I think limited production runs are probably the best. Because compared to what you'll get in a modern motorcycle today, most people want performance. They want the most out of their motorcycle, especially when you're spending that kind of money. But it is a cool bike, and I'm glad that American Biker had it. I was able to ride it, and it's pretty cool for what it is. Almost $40,000 Harley at the time that nobody really thinks about. I wouldn't think this bike was that much, but hey, it was, and there you go. That's my opinion of it, man. Pretty cool motorcycle. Let me know what you think down below. If you like what I do, consider subscribing. See you in the next one, and as always, hold them down.